By all geographic logic, Louisiana should be the most powerful state in the country. It sits at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the single most important economic artery in North America. It should be the New York of the South. But instead, it is a state plagued by sinking land, stagnant growth, and a river that is actively trying to abandon it. So, how did the most strategic location on the continent become its biggest missed opportunity? To understand Louisiana, one must first grasp that its very existence is less about ancient geology and more about an ongoing hydrological project. For the past 7,000 years, the Mississippi River has almost entirely constructed the southern half of the state. Consequently, much of Louisiana's ground resembles a sponge more than solid rock. As the river flows southward, it transports an immense load of sediment, mud, sand, and clay, eroded from the continent's heart. Upon reaching the Gulf of Mexico, the river's current slows, causing this sediment to settle. Over millennia, layer upon layer of this material accumulated, eventually breaching the water's surface to form the delta. This continuous process sculpted the Mississippi River Delta, a unique bird-foot-shaped protrusion extending deep into the Gulf. However, this unique formation presents a critical challenge. Because the land was built from loose mud rather than tectonic uplift, it is inherently unstable. Southern Louisiana effectively functions as a wet sponge, with the water table often just a few centimeters below the surface. Digging a hole in New Orleans, for example, results in immediate water infiltration. There is no bedrock, only thousands of meters of sediment. This presents a daunting reality for construction, as the land naturally subsides. The weight of overlying soil compresses the mud, expelling water and causing the ground to compact and lower. Historically, however, the river offered a natural remedy. Annual spring floods would deposit fresh layers of mud, counteracting the subsidence. It was a perfectly self-sustaining cycle. But then, human intervention disrupted this delicate balance. Southern Louisiana's geography is characterized by a distinct lack of solid boundaries. Unlike most regions where the line between land and ocean is clear, here it is more of a fluid suggestion. The southern coast is a labyrinth of salt marshes, bayous, and cypress swamps, the renowned bayou country. These marshes are vast expanses of grasses, serving as vital buffers against hurricanes by absorbing storm surges before they reach populated areas. Swamps are forested wetlands, dominated by bald cypress and water tupelo trees, uniquely adapted to permanent standing water. Running parallel to the coast are cheniers, ancient beach ridges. These are often the only elevated areas, typically 1.5 to 3 meters above sea level, where communities can safely establish themselves. Historically, navigating this terrain demanded local knowledge that outsiders simply lacked. It was not about traversing land, but rather moving through a liquid landscape, constantly shifting with the tides and seasons. While the South contends with sinking mud, northern Louisiana presents a starkly different world. North of Alexandria, the alluvial plain transitions into tertiary hills. This geography more closely resembles East Texas or Arkansas than the stereotypical swamps of the South. This region is dominated by piney woods, rolling hills covered in dense pine forests and red clay soil. Geologically, this land is much older, formed millions of years ago by ancient marine deposits when the Gulf of Mexico stretched further north, rather than by recent river mud. Crucially, this land is solid, sitting at a higher elevation with well-draining soil, accessible bedrock, and stable footing. Yet, the most critical geographic feature is not any of these distinctions, it is the river's inherent desire to move, not merely flow, but to shift its path. Rivers are not static pipelines, they are dynamic, serpentine entities, often feeling very much alive. As a river constructs its delta, the path to the ocean eventually grows too long and inefficient. Sediment accumulates, impeding flow, and the river's slope diminishes. Inevitably, the river seeks a shorter, steeper route to the sea. This constitutes the ticking time bomb at the core of Louisiana's geography. Approximately every 1,000 years, the Mississippi River naturally alters its course, abandoning its old delta to wither and erode while simultaneously constructing a new one elsewhere. For millennia, the river has dramatically shifted its mouth east and west across the Louisiana coast, akin to a fire hose flailing uncontrollably. Currently, the Mississippi River is poised to abandon its path past New Orleans and its Birdfoot Delta. Physically, the river seeks to divert westward, aiming to flow down the Atchafalaya River. This route offers a path to the Gulf of Mexico that is 240 kilometers shorter and significantly steeper than its present course. If natural processes were unchecked, the Mississippi would have shifted its path back in the 1970s. The main channel would have bypassed Baton Rouge and New Orleans entirely, transforming them into saltwater estuaries and effectively ending their economic viability overnight. This presents the ultimate geographic paradox: the very river that created Louisiana and provides its economic purpose is currently being held hostage against its will. Yet, if its natural inclination were permitted, it would simultaneously dismantle Louisiana's primary reason for existence. Thus, we have a state entirely dependent on a wild river that refuses to remain static, a dynamic that has been consistently challenged by human interference for a very long time. In 1682, the French were not interested in controlling data, but rather the flow of an entire continent. Before any European flag flew over the delta, this region was a bustling hub of indigenous civilization. The Poverty Point culture, situated in what is now northeastern Louisiana, constructed massive earthworks and mounds over 3,000 years ago, predating the Parthenon in Greece and the Colosseum in Rome. These were not simple hunter-gatherers, they were sophisticated engineers who understood the region's complex hydrology, utilizing rivers for trade networks that spanned thousands of kilometers. By the time Europeans arrived, groups such as the Caddo, Choctaw, Natchez, and Chitimacha controlled the territory. They had mastered the bayous, navigating the liquid landscape with dugout canoes in ways that baffled early European explorers. For Europeans, however, Louisiana was not a home, but a strategic backdoor. In 1682, the French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, drifted down the Mississippi River from Canada. Upon reaching its mouth, he claimed the entire drainage basin for King Louis XIV of France, naming it La Louisiana. This was an audacious claim. With a few words, France theoretically owned the heart of the North American continent, from the Rockies to the Appalachians. Yet, claiming such vast territory and actually holding it were two very different challenges. The French quickly realized that controlling the continent necessitated control of the river's mouth. In 1718, Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville founded New Orleans. He selected a site on a natural levee, a sliver of high ground formed by the river's own sediment, at a strategic bend where the river came closest to Lake Pontchartrain. While a brilliant strategic decision, it was a terrible choice for habitability. The site was infested with mosquitoes, prone to flooding, and surrounded by impenetrable cypress swamps. Early settlers succumbed in droves to yellow fever and malaria, earning it the nickname, the Wet Grave. Nevertheless, the city endured, largely due to a grim reality: the forced labor of enslaved Africans. Unlike the English colonies, where enslaved people were primarily agricultural workers, in early Louisiana, they were also the engineers. They constructed the levees, cleared the cypress swamps, and brought with them knowledge of rice cultivation from West Africa, which distinguished the colony. However, Louisiana's history diverges sharply from the rest of the U.S. here. In 1762, as France was losing the 7 Years' War, it secretly ceded Louisiana to Spain to prevent it from falling into British hands. For nearly 40 years, Louisiana remained Spanish, which explains why New Orleans' famous French Quarter actually showcases Spanish architecture, with its iron balconies and courtyards, rather than French colonial styles. During this Spanish period, a significant migration occurred that would forever define the state's culture. The Acadians, French settlers violently expelled from Canada by the British, found refuge in the swamps of South Louisiana. They were poor, isolated, and fiercely independent. Over time, Acadian evolved into Cajun. They adapted to the bayous, forging a unique culture entirely distinct from the aristocratic Creole society of New Orleans. Just as the Spanish grew accustomed to their new territory, the geopolitical chessboard flipped again. Napoleon Bonaparte reacquired Louisiana for France in 1800, harboring dreams of a North American empire. However, after a disastrous defeat in Haiti, brought on by a slave revolt and yellow fever, Napoleon decided to cut his losses. In 1803, the United States was a young, fragile nation clustered along the Atlantic coast. President Thomas Jefferson initially sought to purchase only the city of New Orleans to secure American farmers access to the Mississippi for shipping goods. But Napoleon offered him the entire territory. For $15 million, approximately 10 cents per hectare, the U.S. doubled in size. Louisiana became the 18th state in 1812, just in time to prove its strategic value. The Battle of New Orleans in 1815, the final major engagement of the War of 1812, saw a diverse group of pirates, frontiersmen, enslaved people, and soldiers defeat the British Empire. This victory cemented American control over the river and ensured the continued operation of the lucrative cotton and sugar industries, tragically fueled by human slavery. Consequently, New Orleans became America's wealthiest city and the nation's largest slave market. It served as the banking capital of the South, a cosmopolitan melting pot of languages, races, and money. The Mississippi River, teeming with steamboats, acted as the era's interstate, transporting the interior's wealth to the global market. However, this prosperity rested on a rotting foundation. The economy was entirely reliant on enslaved labor and the dual commodities of cotton and sugar. When the Civil War erupted, Louisiana became an early target. The Union Navy captured New Orleans in 1862 without firing a single shot at the city itself, simply sailing past the forts at the river's mouth. The capture of New Orleans strangled the Confederacy, but it also shattered Louisiana's economy. With the abolition of slavery and the destruction of the plantation system, the state's wealth evaporated. In the post-Civil War era, Louisiana did not recover like the North. Instead, it descended into poverty, violence, and the repressive Jim Crow laws. The once wealthy merchant class was replaced by a corrupt political machine. As the 20th century dawned, however, a new resource was discovered that promised to make Louisiana rich once more: oil in the bayous. With the oil came a man who would transform the state more profoundly than anyone since Bienville, a figure viewed as either a savior or a dictator, depending on who you asked. The kingfish was arriving, and he would inadvertently set the stage for many of the state's modern challenges. Today, Louisiana consistently ranks near the bottom of national lists for opportunity, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic stability. Its population is also shrinking, having lost 40,000 people since 2020, while states like Texas and Florida, with far less strategic river access, have experienced explosive growth. So, how did the state with the ultimate geographic advantage end up falling so far behind? One primary reason for Louisiana's struggles is that its most important city, New Orleans, is physically incapable of functioning like a typical metropolis. In the 19th century, while cities like Chicago and New York expanded rapidly onto solid ground, New Orleans remained trapped. Situated on natural levees, its only high ground was a thin sliver along the river, everything else was swamp. To expand, the city had to drain these back swamps. Yet, here lies the engineering tragedy: when water is drained from Louisiana's mud, the land subsides. As New Orleans expanded in the 20th century, it essentially dug itself into a bowl, meaning roughly half the city today lies below sea level, surrounded by levees. This creates a unique economic impediment: risk. Capital is inherently cautious. Large banks, insurance companies, and corporate headquarters favor stable, predictable geography. They are reluctant to invest billions of dollars in a city that relies on massive pumps merely to manage rainfall, or one that could be devastated by a single hurricane, as nearly occurred in 2005. Consequently, while Chicago became the nation's rail hub and New York its financial center, New Orleans remained primarily a shipping hub, a place to move goods through, not a place to build lasting wealth. While the geography presented difficulties, the politics proved disastrous. Many trace Louisiana's distinctly dysfunctional government today back to one man in the 1930s, Huey P. Long, nicknamed the Kingfish. Long is arguably the most controversial governor in American history. In the early 20th century, Louisiana was governed by a rigid oligarchy of wealthy planters and businessmen who largely disregarded the poor. Long swept into power as a populist firebrand, promising to make every man a king. To his credit, he largely delivered, building thousands of kilometers of paved roads, free bridges, and charity hospitals. He provided free textbooks to schoolchildren and famously taxed the Standard Oil Company to fund these initiatives. However, this progress came at the cost of democratic norms. Long didn't merely govern Louisiana, he effectively owned it. He controlled the legislature, the courts, and the police, utilizing bribery, intimidation, and patronage to consolidate absolute power, effectively transforming Louisiana into a dictatorship within the United States. He even mandated that state employees contribute a portion of their salaries to his campaign. Although he was assassinated in the state capitol in 1935, his legacy endured, establishing a political culture where corruption was not an anomaly, but the operating system itself. For decades, Louisiana politics became synonymous with pay-to-play deals. This had a devastating long-term economic impact. Legitimate, innovative businesses largely avoided the state. Why establish a factory in Louisiana if one must bribe a dozen officials just to obtain a permit? The state became hostile to free enterprise, favoring instead a closed loop of cronyism. Then came Louisiana's oil riches, which proved less beneficial than one might expect. In the mid-20th century, it appeared Louisiana might finally catch a break with the discovery of massive oil and natural gas reserves offshore and in the bayous. However, this turned out to be a curse in disguise, what economists term the resource curse or Dutch disease. When a region possesses a superabundance of one lucrative natural resource, it often fails to develop other sectors of its economy. Louisiana became addicted to oil money. The state felt little pressure to innovate, educate its workforce, or diversify its industries, as the oil checks consistently cleared. This heavy reliance on the petrochemical industry gave rise to Cancer Alley, a 137-kilometer stretch along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, lined with over 150 plants and refineries. While these facilities provide jobs, they also emit massive amounts of pollution, creating a quality-of-life crisis. Modern high-tech workers, the kind who fuel the economies of Austin, Seattle, or Raleigh, generally do not wish to live in areas associated with high pollution and poor health outcomes. The result is a significant brain drain. Louisiana educates its young people at universities like LSU and Tulane, only to see them move to Houston or Atlanta for better job prospects and a cleaner environment. And of course, we must return to the geography. The ultimate reason Louisiana faces such challenges today is its ongoing, seemingly losing war against the Mississippi River itself. As established, the river seeks to change course. However, if it were to do so, the economies of Baton Rouge and New Orleans would collapse, as they would no longer be on the main shipping channel. To prevent this, the U.S. government constructed the Old River Control Structure, a massive concrete gate system designed to force the Mississippi to remain in its current channel. It is arguably the most important piece of infrastructure in America that few know about. Should this structure fail during a major flood, as it nearly did in 1973, the Mississippi River would divert its course. The industrial corridor would be stranded without fresh water or shipping access, and saltwater from the Gulf would rush up the old riverbed, contaminating the drinking water for millions. Thus, Louisiana is compelled to spend billions of dollars and endless political energy simply to maintain the status quo. While other states plan for the future, Louisiana is frantically trying to prevent its land from disappearing. In fact, due to coastal erosion, the state is losing an area of approximately 5,000 square meters to the ocean every 100 minutes. Ultimately, Louisiana is a testament to the complex interplay of geography and governance. It is a state built on land that resists its very existence as land, anchored by a river that yearns to change course, and governed by a system that historically prioritized short-term extraction over long-term growth. All these factors have combined to create the state we see today, one that appears to be just barely holding on. By all rights, Louisiana should stand alongside Florida, New York, Texas, and California as one of the dominant states of the United States. It acts as both a shield and a funnel for the rest of the country, absorbing hurricanes so the interior doesn't have to, processing the oil and gas that continues to power so much, and most importantly, draining water from 31 states. In many ways, Louisiana did not fail, it was sacrificed.